29. I'd like to thank Mr. Brown on behalf of LEDCOR for doing your presentation today and taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and speak to our committee.
Thank you.
We will do a quick turnaround here. The next presenters deemed for 3:30, so we'll just do a quick change of seats and continue on. I'd like to welcome the Canadian Building and Construction Trades Department. I'd ask the individual to introduce himself for the purposes of Hansard and for the knowledge of the committee.
Good day. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Bob Blakely. I'm the Canadian Director of the Building Trades. We're an organization of about 500,000 men and women that make their living in the building and construction trades in Canada. Now, of that 500,000, we don't necessarily have a huge number which are poised on the Saskatchewan border to break in and take all the jobs, but you perhaps can take some comfort in knowing that of the 650 people that Mr. Brown's company laid off in Fort McMurray, most of them are working through the plumbers and pipe fitters, iron workers, or boilermakers in Alberta, simply because it's a dynamic industry with ebb and flow as people get laid off. No job is forever in our business. You work on a project which is time determined by either what you're qualified to do or by the length of the project. I'm a lawyer by profession. I've practiced labor relations law for 31 years in Alberta. I'm going to give you some advice as well as some advocacy. But first, I do have a question. I'm going to present once. If I can get a couple other organizations that I can belong to, can I come 3 times and make my arguments better? I just wondered if that's the way. More organizations, maybe more clients.
Like Mr. Blakely, that most multiple presenters represent different organizations. So
all right, I understand that. I always find more clients.
3 times, I guess.
I'm going to give you some advice. When I initially knew that there was a Saskatchewan party, I came here to make a presentation to the Construction Labor Relations Association, and there was a fellow who in Mr. Hermanson's day was the labor critic. He spoke about how there was a need to smash, perhaps I exaggerate a little, to smash the godless commies on the Labor Board and fix the Labor Act. He didn't realize, perhaps he wasn't that well briefed, that he was in a room full of union contractors who weren't necessarily, interested in hearing that. And then I read the backgrounder, and some of the things in the backgrounder led me to believe that either there was a serious misunderstanding about what the purposes of construction industry bargaining were, or that there was some degree of trying to justify conclusions. You've had an act that has worked pretty well, and there haven't been strikes in Saskatchewan since the 80s. It's not unlike the legislation in Alberta, and the legislation in Alberta, there hasn't been a construction strike since 1988. Before you throw this out, the baby with the bathwater, I would respectfully urge you as a committee to go and talk to a couple of the people who are the acknowledged neutral experts in this area. There's Andy Sims, Andrew C.L. Sims QC, who was the chairman of the Alberta Labor Relations Board for a number of years. Andy did the shaping the balance for the Canada Labor Code when it was looked after. He is an arbitrator. He knows more about this than anybody in the country. There's Morgan Cooper, who was the Newfoundland and Labrador chairman of the Labor Board. He's now gone back to academe at Dalhousie University. There's Tim Armstrong, QC, who was the Deputy Minister of Ontario when they brought their construction legislation in. And there's the Honourable George Adams, who was the chairman of the Ontario Labour Relations Board, was a justice of the High Court, has written the definitive text on labour relations. Professor Harry Arthurs from the University of Toronto, any of these guys can give you some very good advice about why this weird form of bargaining exists? What is the policy reason behind it? Look at it from top to bottom. I would also urge you to beware. It always worries me when employers come to a table like this and say, we know what's best for the workers, and we only want what's best for the workers. By definition, the people who get to choose whether or not there's a union in the workplace should be the employees. 2 people are the minimum you require to certify. If you phone the Alberta Labour Relations Board and ask them about how many organizational certifications the Christian Labour Association, for example, has done in Alberta, they will tell you a significant number. And you ask them how many have had more than 2 or 3 people for each group, they'll tell you, well, that's the way they always organize. In Alberta, they refer to this as a Noah's Ark certification. 2 plumbers, 2 iron workers, 2 boiler makers, and then you negotiate a collective agreement that covers everybody wall to wall. The truth is, in construction, everyone's a craft union. In Alberta, CLAC has to certify trade by trade, but can, on voluntary recognition, create a wall-to-wall agreement. But that agreement is carried out as if it were a craft agreement. It'll be the same for the nice people from CEP when they get more than one employer and actually do something. Why do these bargaining structures exist? Well, you have to look at our industry. The industry is transitory. The industry is competitive. And it's transitory not just for employees, but for employees and employers. A worker will work, if you're a Boilermaker and you're working here in Saskatchewan, you can easily have 15 employers in 1 year and put in a full year's work. It's simply because your work comes in 3 or 4 week chunks of 70 hours a week, and then you're off for a few days and you go back again. In order to make the benefit programs and the education programs work, what ends up happening is the industry organizes the unions and the benefit programs in the same way, which makes those things portable. From a CLAC company to a CLAC company, you can be portable. You can't be portable from CLAC to the building trades or from the building trades to CLAC. Our business is competitive. Every construction job is a job in which lowest bid gets the work. Every construction company pays the same for engineering, the same for materials, the same for overhead, the same for equipment. The only wild card in the pack is the cost of labor. A number of you asked questions of the presenters as to what are the labor rates. If you go on I can tell you this one for Alberta because that's where probably the best comparison is. If you go to the Construction Labor Relations of Alberta website, you'll get all of the collective agreements that exist for Alberta building trades unions. Mr. Brown said he would provide you with the CLAC agreements. You can go to the Alberta Labour Relations Board. There's a requirement to file those documents. You can get them, and you'll find that there are, in fact, some differences in wages between the building trades and CLAC, vast differences in benefits, and differences in overtime. And this is a business in which it's a total compensation business. Ledcor advertises itself in some of its promotional material saying they are 20 to 25% an hour cheaper than a building trades worker. Our industry is craft-based. It is highly fragmented. 85% of all construction contractors in Canada are trade contractors. That's part of the reason we've got a craft base. The crafts are grouped together in clusters. My union, the plumbers and pipe fitters, have plumbers, pipe fitters, steam fitters, sprinkler fitters, instrument fitters, instrument mechanics, radiographers, magnetic particle inspectors, beer tap fitters, welders, you name it. Something to do with metal and something that's round, we've got them in the union. These are clustered groups of trades. And that's the same with most of the 17 unions. That's why their name falls off the end of the page on most things. Our industry had to cope with being fragmented, and the net result was